My name is Lillian. I'm 67 years old, and at my own son's birthday dinner, my daughter-in-law called over security and told them to get me away from the table like I was some kind of street rat. What she didn't know was that I owned the entire restaurant she was sitting in, and the very next day I demoted her from assistant manager to dishwasher with a single stroke of my pen. It's funny how people think they can measure your worth by the shoes you wear, or the way you carry your purse, or the wrinkles around your eyes, never realizing that the quietest woman in the room might just be the one who signs their paycheck, who holds all the power in her aging, veined hands. And in that moment, as I stood humiliated in front of my family, I realized it was time to stop protecting the peace and start reclaiming my place. But to really understand how it all unraveled that night, how a birthday dinner turned into the start of a reckoning, I need to take you back to where this all began. Chloe came into our lives like a lightning bolt wrapped in silk, elegant, magnetic, and dangerous in a way Jason was too blind to see. From the moment she shook my hand with fingers that barely closed around mine, I knew she'd never see me as anything but a stepping stone. And I wish I could say I was surprised by what she did that night. But the truth is, I saw it coming. I just didn't want to admit that my own son had chosen someone who would someday treat me like nothing. The invitation had come through Jason's assistant, not from him directly, and it was as cold and curt as a corporate memo, just the time, the place, and the expectation that I would dress appropriately. No warmth, no, we're looking forward to seeing you. Not even a quick phone call to check how I'd been. But still, I went, because I'm his mother, and no matter how far we drifted, that meant something to me. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing my best slacks and a silk blouse I'd kept for special occasions, the kind that still held the faint scent of the perfume my husband used to love. The hostess greeted me with polite confusion, unsure where to place me until I spotted them walking in. Jason, straight-backed and handsome like his father once was, and Chloe, draped in a cream-colored dress so tight she could barely breathe, with hair coiled high on her head like she was posing for a magazine. They didn't notice me right away, or maybe they pretended not to, and when the hostess led them to their table, I followed behind at a quiet distance, watching as they laughed and air-kissed the other guests. The table was already full, 8 chairs for 9 people, and I stood there, just a step away, waiting for someone to notice, for Jason to pull up an extra seat, or for Chloe to greet me with even the thinnest slice of civility. But Chloe barely looked up. She glanced at me like I was a stray who had wandered in from the cold, then turned to the waiter with a sneer in her voice and said, "Excuse me, there's someone hovering at our table. Can you please have security escort her out? She must be confused." It was said with such ease, such confidence, that I almost believed I really didn't belong there. The room went silent. The other diners looked up. Even the busboys paused mid-step. I felt my hands trembling, not from fear or even anger, but from something deeper, like the slow cracking of an old foundation under too much weight. My own son sat there, saying nothing, pretending to scroll through his phone while his wife publicly erased me. The waiter, Miguel, a quiet young man who'd worked there for almost 2 years, recognized me instantly. His eyes flicked to mine, wide with uncertainty, and I gave him the smallest nod. "Go on. Do it. Let her think she's won." I walked out without a word. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. What Chloe didn't know, and what none of them knew, is that every tablecloth in that restaurant had been chosen by me, every wall color approved by me, every employee hired and trained under my watch. I bought Prima Lucia 5 years ago when the previous owner went bankrupt, using money I'd saved for decades in silence. After my husband passed and I was left with nothing but grit and an old ledger full of dreams. And Chloe? Chloe worked for me. She strutted around like she ran the place, whispering instructions, criticizing servers, making decisions she had no authority to make. The manager was too weak to confront her, charmed by her polished looks and empty compliments. But I saw through her. I saw how she treated the staff, how she looked down on anyone who didn't meet her definition of wealth. That night, I went home and sat in the dark, letting the silence stretch around me like a protective blanket. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I simply sat still and remembered every moment I had spent building myself back up. Every long night washing dishes to pay for one more investment. Every sacrifice I'd made to own something that no one could ever take from me again. And in the morning, I made a call. The next day, Chloe Hartman's name was removed from the assistant manager list. Her new position? Dishwashing staff, effective immediately. She wouldn't see it coming, but she would feel it, every single plate. The night after that dinner, while Chloe slept in satin sheets and dreamed of herself as queen of a kingdom she thought she owned, I sat at my kitchen table in an old flannel robe, drinking weak tea from a chipped mug and staring at the same 4 walls I'd been looking at since I lost my husband. The room was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp above the stove, casting long shadows across the peeling linoleum and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't sad. Not exactly. It was something heavier than that, something that had been building for years, a kind of quiet ache from watching my son slip further away and realizing too late that I had protected him so much, he'd forgotten who had carried him through the worst years of his life. My husband James died 15 years ago, and with him went the small construction company we'd built together from the ground up. He was a good man with big dreams, but he was too trusting, and when the market collapsed, so did everything we owned. Within 6 months, the bank took our trucks, our contracts dried up, and the house we raised Jason in was gone. We moved into a small rental, then a smaller one, and eventually I was left with nothing but a suitcase, a few pieces of jewelry I refused to sell, and a heart full of memories I didn't know what to do with. Jason was already off at college then, full scholarship, too far away to see how bad things had gotten. I told him I was fine. I always told him I was fine. But I wasn't. I worked nights cleaning offices and spent my mornings behind the counter at a corner bakery, my back aching and my feet swollen by noon. I learned how to stretch $1 until it screamed, how to say no to new shoes, to birthdays, to heat in the winter. I told myself it was temporary, that something better would come, that hard work would be enough, even when I knew the world didn't care how much you gave if you didn't wear the right label on your collar. But I never gave up. I saved every tip, every leftover dollar. I kept a little notebook under my mattress where I tracked every cent like it was sacred. I didn't eat out. I didn't travel. I didn't even go to the movies. I just worked and waited. And then, one rainy afternoon, I walked past a little Italian restaurant called Prima Lucia. The windows were dark, the doors locked, and a handwritten sign in the glass said they were closing for good. Something about that place pulled at me. Maybe it was the memory of James taking me to a similar restaurant for our 10th anniversary, when we still believed we were unstoppable. Or maybe it was the fact that I could still smell garlic and rosemary on the breeze, as if the building itself wasn't ready to give up. I went home and opened that notebook, flipping through every page I had filled over the past decade, every sacrifice inked in careful lines. I was short, far short, but something in me refused to close the cover and walk away. So I went to the bank, and to another and another. I used every ounce of my quiet reputation as the dependable lady who never missed a payment, the woman who paid in cash and always smiled. It wasn't much, but it was just enough to convince a local credit union to take a chance on me. I signed the papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and walked out the owner of a restaurant I knew nothing about, except that it had heart, and that was something I understood. The first year was brutal. I slept in the back office more nights than I care to admit. I learned the difference between fresh basil and dried, how to fold napkins into swans, how to calm angry customers and fix a broken espresso machine with nothing but a paper clip and a prayer. I hired carefully. A young chef named Marcy who had fire in her bones and hands that moved like music. A dishwasher named Leonard who couldn't read but knew how to make the silverware shine like mirrors. A single mother named Dana who worked 2 jobs and still managed to make everyone laugh during the lunch rush. Together, we made the place breathe again. And I never told a soul. Not even Jason. When he came home after college, newly employed at a sleek accounting firm and dressed in suits that cost more than my car, I smiled and told him I was helping out at a local diner. I didn't want him to feel responsible. I didn't want him to think I expected anything. And maybe a part of me was afraid he wouldn't care one way or the other. He visited less and less, called only on holidays, and when he finally brought Chloe into my life, it became painfully clear that the boy I raised had become a man who measured love in luxury. She was charming at first, polished, the kind of woman who always knew what fork to use and how to make people feel small without ever raising her voice. She complimented my sweater once and then asked if it was vintage, as if it were impossible that I could afford something decent in this lifetime. I laughed it off, but I saw the way she glanced at my shoes, the way her nose twitched every time I mentioned working. She saw me as old, worn out, irrelevant. And worst of all, Jason never corrected her. When Chloe started working at Prima Lucia, I kept my distance. She applied for a part-time hostess job after quitting some marketing role she said was beneath her. She didn't even know I owned the place. I operated through a manager, kept my name off the surface. She walked through those doors like she was doing everyone a favor. And soon enough, she was whispering to customers, making suggestions to the chef, bossing around waitstaff like she was the general of a sinking ship. I watched from the shadows, quietly reviewing the weekly reports, listening to the staff complain in hushed voices about her entitled attitude. She treated Miguel like he was invisible. She rolled her eyes at Marcy's accent. She once laughed when Leonard spilled water on himself during a rush, calling him clumsy behind his back. I took notes. I waited. I wanted to believe Jason would notice, that he'd step in and say something, but he didn't. He was too busy climbing the corporate ladder, too dazzled by Chloe's polished image to see the rot underneath. And when they chose Prima Lucia for his birthday dinner, without realizing whose name was etched into the deed, I knew the moment had arrived. I didn't plan revenge that night. I planned truth, and sometimes that's worse than revenge, because truth has a way of settling deep into the bones, and Chloe was about to feel every ounce of it. There's something almost poetic in watching someone build a life around illusion, layer by layer, like icing on a hollow cake, until one day it all begins to sink under its own weight. And that was exactly how Chloe carried herself in the weeks after that dinner, like she was untouchable, like the woman she had humiliated in front of friends, family and staff no longer existed, like the mess she left behind could be swept away by her next manicure or expensive perfume. She never suspected that the eyes watching her most closely weren't those of the servers she scolded or the customers she tried to impress, but mine, quietly observing everything from a place she never thought to look. Every morning before the restaurant opened, I sat in my small office tucked behind the wine cellar, sipping coffee from a mismatched mug and reading through the nightly shift reports, payroll summaries, and customer feedback cards, many of which contained subtle mentions of Chloe's behavior, how she snapped at the waitstaff, made inappropriate jokes about busboys, or offered unsolicited menu critiques as if she were some culinary expert, rather than a woman who barely knew how to boil pasta without supervision. The manager, bless his heart, had grown too nervous to confront her, too afraid of rocking the boat or upsetting Jason, who would occasionally stop by for dinner and bring Chloe flowers wrapped in paper more expensive than the bottle of wine she always demanded. The staff, though respectful, had started to grumble beneath the surface. I could hear it in the pauses between words, in the forced laughter that followed her fake compliments, in the sideways glances they exchanged when she walked into the kitchen in heels that had no business near a stove. Marcy, who had given her soul to rebuilding the menu and training new hires, began requesting fewer shifts. Dana, always cheerful, had grown quieter. Even Leonard, who rarely spoke to anyone, had started taking his lunch outside just to avoid being mocked when he spilled coffee on his apron or tripped over the mop bucket. I watched it all unfold like a slow, silent unraveling, the way you watch a loose thread on a sweater, knowing it's only a matter of time before everything comes apart. Chloe didn't just treat people poorly. She treated the restaurant like her personal stage, strutting through the dining room during peak hours, interrupting servers mid-sentence to correct them in front of customers, offering unsolicited fashion advice to hostesses who were half her age, and constantly reminding anyone who would listen that she had an eye for quality and real leadership potential. The irony of it was almost amusing if it weren't so destructive, because while she basked in the admiration of guests who didn't know any better, she completely failed to understand that the true strength of a place like Prima Lucia didn't lie in appearances. It lived in the heart of the people who showed up early, stayed late, scrubbed the kitchen tiles until their knees ached, and treated every table like a homecoming dinner. Still, I said nothing. I held my tongue even when I wanted to scream. I kept the manager in place even when I could have fired him for letting her run wild. I did it because I needed her to show the world who she truly was, to let her wear that mask until it cracked under the pressure of her own arrogance. And once the cracks began to show, I knew it wouldn't take much to pull everything down. It was only a matter of time before she crossed one line too many. That line came on a Tuesday, quiet and overcast, when Miguel came into the office with a face pale as parchment and trembling hands, holding a note Chloe had written accusing him of stealing tips and demanding he be fired immediately. I knew Miguel. He'd been with us for nearly 3 years, always early, never once missed a shift, sending part of his paycheck back to his grandmother in El Paso every single month. I didn't even need to investigate. I knew the accusation was fabricated, designed to make space for one of Chloe's cousins who'd been sniffing around the front desk for weeks like a cat waiting to pounce on a mousehole. I calmed Miguel, told him to take the afternoon off, and once he left, I stared at that folded slip of paper for what felt like hours, my hand resting gently over it as if absorbing its venom. It was no longer about disrespect. It was about cruelty. That night, I walked the restaurant alone after closing, passing every table, running my fingers along the smooth edges, remembering the nights I mopped the floors myself and closed the register with hands that ached from scrubbing, the way James used to do the books by candlelight when the power was out, how I'd stood in this very room when the ceiling still leaked and the chairs wobbled. I had rebuilt this place brick by brick, sweat and silence, and I wasn't about to let a woman like Chloe tarnish it just because no one had ever taught her the meaning of decency. She had thought she was above consequence, but what she didn't understand was that the higher you build your throne on other people's backs, the farther you fall when they step aside. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. The decision had been made, and by morning everything was in motion. She would learn, not through rage or public humiliation, but through something much colder, much more permanent. She would learn what it meant to be truly unseen, and she would learn it in the exact same back room she never bothered to enter. That morning didn't feel like the start of something dramatic. It felt quiet, almost calm, with the soft hum of early traffic outside the window and the familiar scent of fresh coffee drifting through the air as I sat alone in the back office of the restaurant I had built with my own 2 hands and years of quiet sacrifice, reviewing the paperwork I had carefully prepared the night before, the demotion notice with Chloe's name typed neatly across the top, the revised schedule that placed her on dishwashing duty 5 nights a week, the official explanation filed under performance and behavior issues. Nothing cruel or harsh, just facts, truth on paper. Finally catching up with the woman who had pushed too far for too long. I took a long sip from my coffee and stared at that envelope, knowing she'd find it sitting on the manager's desk by the end of the day. And for a moment, I thought maybe I wouldn't even need to be there when she saw it. Maybe it could all happen cleanly, without confrontation, without drama. But deep down, I knew someone like Chloe wouldn't let anything end quietly. Not when pride was involved, not when she believed the world owed her a crown. I stayed in the office longer than planned, double-checking vendor invoices, organizing files, letting time pass slowly, until I heard voices outside the door, sharp, fast, urgent. Chloe's voice rising in volume as she stormed through the hallway, her tone high and angry, blaming someone for misplacing a reservation card, accusing the front staff of incompetence, throwing words around like confetti soaked in vinegar, and I could hear her heels clicking faster as she moved closer, then closer still, and in that moment I knew I wouldn't have the luxury of staying hidden after all. The office door flew open so hard it shook the frame, and there she was, standing in the doorway with her perfectly styled hair already frizzing at the edges from the summer humidity, her eyes wide and red with frustration, her hand gripping a printed copy of the new schedule, demanding answers, ready to fight. She hadn't seen me at first. She came in mid-rant, focused only on her own outrage. But the second her eyes landed on mine, her whole body shifted. Her voice froze in her throat, and for a brief second, I saw something unfamiliar flicker in her expression. Not anger, not defiance, but fear, real and raw, the kind that sneaks in when you realize the person you thought was powerless has been the one holding the reins all along. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just sat there, calm and steady, letting the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. I could see her breathing change, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hand holding the paper trembled just slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might explode, say something reckless, throw the folder across the room, unleash the storm I knew had been building behind her eyes. But then, something unexpected happened. From the front of the restaurant, we heard a loud crash. One of the busboys had dropped a full tray of glasses, the sound sharp and sudden, like an alarm bell breaking the air, and Chloe jumped, actually startled, like someone snapped her out of a trance. And just like that, the moment passed. She blinked, took a step back, looked down at the paper in her hands, then turned and walked out without another word, her heels clicking faster now, no longer in control, no longer carrying power, but moving with the nervous pace of someone who doesn't know where they stand anymore. I sat there still as stone, listening to her retreat, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to relief. Not because I had put her in her place, but because I had done it without raising my voice, without letting her drag me down into the mud she liked to live in, because she had been ready to break something, but I had refused to break with her. Later that afternoon, I walked through the restaurant checking in with the staff, noticing how the kitchen moved more easily, how the servers looked each other in the eye again, how the tension that had hovered in the air like smoke for months was finally beginning to clear. No one asked what had happened. They didn't have to. People can feel when something heavy has been lifted. I walked past Miguel, who gave me a small, grateful nod. I passed Dana at the hostess stand, her posture already more relaxed. Even the chef, usually locked in her own world, glanced up with a kind of silent acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. That evening, I stayed late, long after closing, walking slowly through the empty dining room with the lights dimmed and the chairs turned upside down on the tables, remembering how far this place had come, and how far I had come with it, not just as an owner or a mother, but as a woman who had been pushed aside, stepped over, silenced, and still managed to stand tall, even when no one noticed. And as I stood there, alone with the quiet, I didn't feel bitter or triumphant. I felt calm, steady, and ready, because the next morning Chloe would report to the kitchen with an apron and a mop, and whether she liked it or not, she would learn what it meant to earn a place instead of assume one. The next morning, the kitchen clock had barely struck 8 when I saw her come through the back entrance, shoulders stiff, lips pressed so tightly together they had turned pale, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She didn't bother to take off as she stood by the service station looking completely out of place in a black designer blouse and polished leather flats, clearly hoping to cling to some last piece of her imagined status, though it was already slipping from her like cheap perfume after a storm. I had left her new apron neatly folded on the metal shelf, along with a clipboard of cleaning assignments and a checklist for opening procedures, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because this is what everyone on dish duty received, and if she wanted to claim she was being treated unfairly, she'd have to admit to not wanting equality to begin with. I didn't watch her directly, didn't hover or gloat. I simply stood by the sink, checking inventory lists and letting my presence be felt without a word, the way quiet authority always feels heavier than loud orders ever could. And though she didn't speak to me, I could see the way her hands trembled when she picked up the rag, how her polished nails scraped against the counter as she scrubbed down the sink, the slow realization setting in that no one was going to rescue her, no one was going to interrupt and restore her to the position she thought she deserved. She tried to hide it, of course, straightened her posture, forced a neutral expression, pretended not to notice when Dana walked past with 2 trays stacked high, or when Miguel handed her a bin of silverware without even looking up. But I saw it all. Every tiny crack in the mask she'd worn for so long, every twitch of the mouth when a speck of dishwater landed on her blouse, every quick glance toward the door as if expecting someone, anyone, to stop the unraveling. And it was only the first hour. By noon, her hair was damp from the steam, her sleeves were rolled up unevenly, and her shoes were stained with sudsy water. I had done the same work for years, day in and day out, when no one was watching, when no one said thank you, when it was the only way to survive. And now, as I watched her wipe the same counters I had scrubbed through grief and fatigue, I felt no joy, no vengeance, just a strange, quiet closure that came from knowing she'd finally stepped into a truth she'd always refused to see. But the day wasn't done. Not yet. Because I had planned something else. Something simple but deliberate. A quiet mirror held up to her vanity. That evening, we had a small family gathering scheduled in the private dining room. Something Jason himself had arranged weeks before, not knowing what was coming, not bothering to cancel even after the dinner incident. He had sent a short confirmation to the manager about the reservation, 12 people, set menu, wine pairings, and although he hadn't mentioned my name, I knew he expected I wouldn't show, that I would stay away to keep the peace, to avoid tension, to be the bigger person again, but I had no intention of staying away, not this time. I simply had the table prepared as requested, the menu arranged, the wine selected, and I let the shift schedule do the rest, because Chloe was on duty, and in our restaurant, when you're on duty, you serve. It was almost surreal watching her bring out the bread basket to the same group of people who had sat around that birthday table and watched her cast me out without a second thought. Watching her try to keep her chin high as she poured wine into glasses and nodded along to conversations where no one quite knew what to say to her now, not even Jason, who seemed more preoccupied with his phone than the growing discomfort in the room. She didn't look at me directly, but I saw how her hands gripped the tray a little too tight, how her movements were mechanical, rehearsed, desperate to hold on to some version of dignity that was already long gone. The staff didn't laugh, didn't smirk, didn't whisper. They simply did their jobs. They treated her the way she had always treated them, like she was part of the background, like her presence didn't carry weight, like she was just another uniform trying to make it through the shift. At one point, she dropped a fork. It clattered onto the tile floor with a sharp, metallic sound that rang through the room and made everyone pause for just a second. Jason glanced over but didn't move. Someone cleared their throat. Chloe knelt down, picked it up, and disappeared into the kitchen with her eyes on the floor. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. When the dinner ended and the guests began to leave, I remained seated at the head of the table, sipping my tea slowly, watching the candles burn low, letting the quiet stretch between us as Chloe emerged from the back, wiping her hands on a towel, her face pale and blank, not angry, not defiant, just empty in a way I recognized all too well. She didn't speak. She didn't look my way. But I knew she had felt it. Not just the work, the shift, The understanding that no title, no outfit, no marriage certificate could protect her from the consequences of who she had chosen to be. And for the first time since that birthday night, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but peace. The kind that comes when a woman finally stops trying to earn the respect of people who never learned how to give it.
In the days that followed, the restaurant settled into a new rhythm, steadier, quieter, as if something heavy had finally been lifted from the air. And though Chloe showed up for her shifts with forced smiles and tight posture, it was clear the light behind her eyes had dimmed, not from the work itself, but from the sudden absence of control, of status, of the illusion that she was untouchable. She no longer barked orders or hovered around the hostess stand, pretending to oversee things she didn't understand. Instead, she arrived, worked, and left, barely exchanging words with anyone unless necessary, and I could see it every time she looked in the mirror of the prep station window, how she struggled to recognize the reflection staring back, because that version of her didn't wear diamonds or command attention. She just washed dishes, wiped counters, and carried the quiet weight of someone finally made small enough to feel the space around her. Jason, however, remained distant, and it hurt more than I let on. The way he avoided my calls, the way he canceled lunch the one time I asked to meet, the way his silence rang louder than any argument could have. And though I had always told myself I'd never force him to choose, I began to see that the choice had already been made long ago, not with words, but with absence, with every time he had stood by while Chloe undermined me, with every event I was excluded from, with every birthday card that never came. I told myself I could live with that. I told myself I didn't need his approval. But part of me still clung to the hope that, maybe one day, he would see what she had become, what I had endured, and remember who had raised him, who had kept the lights on through winters and never let him go to bed hungry, even when I had nothing left for myself.
That hope shattered the morning he walked into the restaurant unannounced, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his face as unreadable as ever, standing in the doorway of my office like a stranger. And I knew before he even opened his mouth that he hadn't come to apologize. He placed a set of legal documents on my desk, clean, official, cold, and said he had power of attorney through a clause I had forgotten about from years ago. Something we'd signed together when I had minor surgery, when he was still in college and I trusted him with everything. And just like that, he told me he was selling the restaurant. I wouldn't be managing anything anymore. I would be given a payout. My name would no longer be on the paperwork. Chloe, he said, would help transition the staff. They were moving out of state, investing in something bigger. It was done. And there was nothing I could do. For a moment, the room disappeared. I couldn't hear the hum of the fridge. I couldn't feel my hands. I just stared at the papers, then at the man who had once been my baby, and wondered how it was possible to give someone everything and still end up the one erased. He didn't wait for my reaction. He turned and walked out without a second glance. And just like that, the thing I had rebuilt from ashes was gone. Not to strangers, but to the very people who had tried to strip me of dignity at my own dinner table. But life has a way of turning on the quiet wheels no one sees, and when everything feels like it's fallen apart, that's often when something unexpected slips through the cracks. That evening, as I sat on the porch in silence, the restaurant phone rang through to my cell, a call I nearly ignored, but something made me answer. It was Miguel, his voice shaking but steady enough to tell me that something was wrong. He had seen the documents Chloe brought in, papers with forged timestamps, discrepancies in the signatures, and files she'd been printing off-site for weeks. He had noticed money missing from the petty cash. At first, he thought it was a system glitch, but now he was sure. Chloe had been quietly funneling money through shell invoices long before the demotion, and Jason had no idea. I told him to send everything to my lawyer, and I stayed on the line as he walked me through each detail, one stolen amount after another, one false vendor after the next. Within 48 hours, my attorney filed for an injunction. We froze the sale. I reactivated my original ownership rights using emergency clauses tied to fraud protection. I submitted evidence to the state board and notified tax compliance authorities. Chloe was removed immediately pending investigation. And Jason finally picked up the phone, but not to argue. He asked how long I'd known. I said long enough, and then I hung up. He came by once more, days later, not with arrogance, but with lowered eyes, telling me he didn't know, that he hadn't seen it, that he had trusted her. I listened, but I said nothing. Not out of anger, but because I had learned that some wounds don't need stitching. They just need distance and silence to heal on their own. He left without expecting forgiveness. And maybe one day I'll give it, but not yet. Now the restaurant is mine again, fully, legally, quietly. The staff knows the truth, though no one talks about it. The kitchen runs smoother. The energy is different. I sit at the same desk every morning with my coffee, watching the light hit the windows just right. And I know now that dignity isn't something others give you. It's what you claim when you stop asking to be seen. And to anyone listening to this, I'll ask you something simple. Have you ever been treated like you were nothing by someone who didn't know you were everything? If you have, tell me. What did you do next?